The first sound was not a sound at all, but a feeling. A gentle pressure in the air, a subtle shift in the deep and quiet dark that held the city of Constantinople in its soft embrace. It was the moment just before the dawn, when the night, ancient and weary, prepares to hand its watch to the young and hopeful morning. In a small, whitewashed room on a narrow street that wound its way up from the shores of the Golden Horn, a man named Leo stirred in his sleep. His breath, slow and even, caught for a moment, and his eyes, still closed, fluttered beneath their lids. The world returned to him in layers, as delicate and carefully placed as the tesserae he worked with each day. First came the feel of the coarse-spun linen sheet against his skin, a familiar and comforting weight. Then the coolness of the stone floor, which seemed to seep up through his thin mattress, a reminder of the solid earth beneath the sprawling city. He could smell the lingering scent of beeswax from the candle he had extinguished hours ago, a sweet, waxy perfume that mingled with the faint, salty tang of the sea air, a constant companion in this city built on water. Slowly the sounds began to filter in, distant and muted, as if traveling through layers of fine wool. The first was the soft, rhythmic creak of a fishing boat's oars somewhere out on the water, the sound carrying with surprising clarity in the pre-dawn stillness. It was a lonely, peaceful sound, a lullaby for the city's edge. Then, from further away, from one of the great monasteries that dotted the hills, came the deep, resonant toll of *Samantron*, a heavy wooden plank being struck with a mallet, calling the monks to their first prayers. It was not a clang or a chime, but a profound, woody thrum that seemed to vibrate in Leo's very bones, a heartbeat for the spiritual life of the empire. Leo opened his eyes. The room was still cloaked in shades of gray and charcoal, but a faint pearlescent light was beginning to gather at the edges of the single wooden shutter on his window. It was not yet the light of the sun, but the sun's promise, its gentle announcement. He lay still for a long moment, simply breathing, allowing the world to reassemble itself around him. He was a man of patience, a man whose entire life was built upon the careful, unhurried placement of one small thing next to another to create a magnificent whole. His waking was no different. It was a mosaic of sensations, each piece finding its proper place. He pushed himself up, the straw-filled mattress rustling softly beneath him. He sat on the edge of his low bed, his bare feet finding the cool, smooth stone of the floor. The coolness was a welcome anchor, grounding him in the present moment. He reached for the small clay cup on the low table beside his bed and took a sip of the water he had left there the night before. It was cool and tasted faintly of the earth from which the cup was made. His room was simple, a testament to a life dedicated to a single purpose. In one corner stood a sturdy wooden chest containing his few changes of tunic and cloak. On the wall hung a small, simply carved wooden cross, its surface worn smooth by the touch of his fingers over the years. The rest of the space was given over to the tools and treasures of his trade. Neatly stacked against one wall were shallow wooden trays, filled with a rainbow of glass and stone. Even in the dim light, he could see the deep, velvety blue of lapis, the rich, earthy red of jasper, the milky green of serpentine, and the pure, cloud-like white of marble. And in their own special trays, covered with a soft cloth, were the most precious of all, the gold-leaf tesserae, tiny squares of glass with a whisper-thin sheet of pure gold fused to their backs, waiting to catch the light and transform it into a vision of heaven. Beside the trays were his tools, laid out with the care of a surgeon. His small, sharp-headed hammer, the Martellina Asterix, its steel head worn into a comfortable shape from years of use. His hardy, a small, sharp chisel set into a block of wood, against which he would cut the larger pieces of stone and glass into the perfect shape. There were trowels of various sizes for spreading plaster and soft cloths for polishing. These objects were more than just tools to Leo. They were extensions of his hands, his eyes, his very will. They held the memory of every mosaic he had ever helped to create. From the simple geometric patterns in a wealthy merchant's villa to the glorious, soaring figures that now adorn the churches and palaces of the Queen of Cities. Leo stood and stretched, his joints popping softly in the quiet room. He walked to the window and pushed open the heavy wooden shutter. The air that flowed in was cool and damp, carrying the scent of salt, wet stone, and the distant, promising aroma of baking bread from a neighborhood oven that had been lit long before the sun had risen. Below, the narrow street was empty, its cobblestones gleaming faintly in the growing twilight. The city was still dreaming, but it was a light, restless sleep, ready to be broken. He performed his morning ablutions with a basin of cool water, the simple act, a ritual of purification, of preparing himself for the sacred work ahead. He dressed not in the rough, plaster-stained tunic he would wear for work, but in a clean, simple woolen one of a deep, undyed brown. First, he would go to pray. He left his small home, pulling the heavy wooden door closed behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place seemed loud in the morning stillness. He walked down the winding street, his leather-soled sandals making a soft slapping sound on the stones. The air was alive with the soft sounds of a city waking. A dog barked once, a sharp, lonely sound that was quickly followed by silence. From an open window above, he heard the gentle murmur of a mother soothing a waking child. The smell of wood smoke was beginning to lace the air, a sign that hearths were being kindled for the morning meal. He was not heading to the great church, not yet. His destination was a small neighborhood chapel, tucked away in a quiet square. It was an old church, built centuries before, its brickwork worn and its frescoes faded. But for Leo, it was a place of profound peace. He pushed open the heavy, iron-banded door and stepped inside. The air within was thick with the scent of old incense, beeswax, and the cool, damp smell of stone. A few dozen oil lamps flickered in the gloom, their small flames casting a warm, dancing light on the dark walls and the worn flagstones of the floor. A handful of other early risers were already there, scattered throughout the nave, their heads bowed in silent prayer. An old woman in a dark shawl knelt before an icon of the Theotokos, the Mother of God, her lips moving silently. A baker, his tunic still dusted with flour, stood near the back, his eyes closed. Leo found a quiet corner, the same one he sought out every morning. He did not kneel but stood, as was the custom, his head bowed and his hands clasped before him. He did not recite grand, formal prayers. His communion was a silent one, a quiet offering of his day, his hands, his heart, to the God whose glory he sought to reflect in his art. He thought of the work that awaited him high up in the celestial dome of the Hagia Sophia. He was not creating beauty, he believed, but merely revealing a shadow of the beauty that already existed in the divine mind. His work was a prayer made of stone and glass, a hymn sung in color and light. He prayed for a steady hand, a clear eye, and a humble spirit. He prayed that he might be a worthy vessel for the task he had been given. He remained there for a long time, letting the peace of the small chapel seep into him, fortifying him for the day ahead. The quiet murmurs of the other worshippers, the soft hiss and pop of the oil lamps, the vast, heavy silence that filled the spaces in between. It was all part of the morning's gentle music. When he finally felt a sense of deep calm settle over him, he made the sign of the cross, his fingers tracing the familiar sacred geometry in the air, and quietly left the chapel. The world outside had changed. The sky to the east, over the hills of Asia Minor, was now a soft, blushing pink, streaked with veins of pale orange and gold. The light was stronger, clearer, and the city was beginning to stir in earnest. The sounds were louder now, more varied. The clatter of a donkey's hooves on the cobblestones, the rhythmic call of a street vendor selling hot bread, the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Constantinople was yawning, stretching, and coming to life. Leo made his way back to his small home. The aroma of baking bread was irresistible, so he stopped at a small stall set into the wall of a building, where a man with flour-dusted arms was pulling flat, round loaves from a clay oven. The heat from the oven washed over Leo's face, a comforting warmth in the cool morning air. He exchanged a few quiet words of greeting with the baker and purchased a small loaf, still warm from the fire, and a handful of dark, wrinkled olives. Back in his room, he ate his simple breakfast. He sat on the edge of his bed, tearing off pieces of the warm, chewy bread and dipping them into a small bowl of olive oil. The oil was green and fragrant, a gift from his cousin who had an olive grove on the island of Chios. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. The sharp, salty taste of the olives, the rich, peppery flavor of the oil, the comforting, wholesome taste of the bread. It was a simple meal, but it was nourishing and good. It was the taste of the earth, the sun, the sea. When he had finished, he carefully wrapped the remaining bread in a cloth. He would eat it for his midday meal on the scaffolding. Then he began the final preparations for his work. He changed into his working tunic, a garment of rough, sturdy linen, stained with a history of plaster, grout, and paint. He checked the edges of his hammer and hardy, ensuring they were sharp and true. Then he turned to his trays of tesserae. This was a ritual he never rushed. With the gentle light of the full dawn now streaming through his window, the small squares of glass and stone glowed with an inner life. He ran his fingers over them, feeling their different textures. The smooth, cool surface of the polished marble, the slightly rougher, grittier feel of the terracotta, the slick, cold perfection of the glass. He picked up one of the gold pieces. In the morning light, it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was not just a piece of glass with gold on it, it was a vessel for light, a tiny sun, a fragment of eternity. He was working on a specific section of the great church's dome, the wing of a seraphim, one of the 6-winged angels that stood in the pendentives, the triangular supports that allowed the massive dome to rest upon its square base. The design, laid out by the master artist, called for a complex and subtle shading of blues, whites, and grays to give the feathers a sense of depth and movement, all set against the shimmering, endless gold of heaven. He carefully selected the colors he would need for the day, scooping handfuls of the precious tesserae into small leather pouches. He chose a range of blues, from the deep, twilight indigo to the pale, airy blue of a summer sky. He selected whites, the pure, brilliant white of Thasian marble and the softer, creamier white of other stones. He chose grays, some warm, some cool, to create the shadows between the feathers. And finally, with the utmost care, he filled a pouch with the golden tesserae that would form the background, the celestial light against which the angel's wing would beat for all time. He gathered his pouches and his tools, wrapping the hammer and hardy in a thick cloth to protect their edges and to keep them from clanking as he walked. He placed everything, along with his wrapped bread, into a sturdy leather satchel. He took one last look around his small, quiet room, a sanctuary of peace and preparation. Then he slung the satchel over his shoulder, stepped out into the now bustling street, and began his journey to the center of the world, to the Church of Holy Wisdom, the Hagia Sophia. The walk was a gradual immersion into the lifeblood of the city. His own narrow street soon fed into a wider avenue, and the sounds and smells intensified. The air was thick with the scent of spices from the east, the aroma of roasting chestnuts from a vendor's cart, the leathery smell of a sandal-maker's shop, and the ever-present salty breath of the sea. The murmur of voices grew into a steady hum, a symphony of languages from every corner of the known world. Greek, of course, was the dominant tongue, but Leo's ears caught the lilt of Latin from a group of soldiers, the guttural sounds of a Syrian merchant haggling over the price of silk, and the soft, flowing speech of an Egyptian scholar. He walked along the maze, the great central artery of Constantinople, a wide, colonnaded street that pulsed with the life of the empire. He passed marble fountains where women gathered to fill their water jugs, their conversations a bright, bubbling counterpoint to the steady tread of feet on the stone pavement. He saw senators in their fine, white togas, their faces stern and purposeful. He saw craftsmen in their leather aprons, their hands stained with dye or clay. He saw children chasing pigeons in a sun-drenched square, their laughter echoing off the marble facades of the surrounding buildings. Leo moved through it all with a quiet, observant calm. He was a part of this city, yet his mind was already beginning to ascend, to climb the scaffolding to the silent, light-filled space where his real work awaited him. He was like a diver, taking one last deep breath of the surface world before plunging into the depths of his craft. And then he saw it. Rising above the rooftops, the columns, and the chaos of the city was the dome. Even after months of working there, the sight of the Hagia Sophia never failed to stop his breath. It was not just a building, it was a miracle, a prayer made manifest in brick, mortar, and marble. It seemed to float, impossibly light, a vast, shallow bowl of heaven resting gently on the earth. The architects, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus, had done more than build a church. They had captured a piece of the sky. In the bright morning sun, the dome seemed to hum with a silent, powerful energy, drawing all the light of the city to itself. Leo felt a familiar sense of awe and profound humility. He, a simple man from a narrow street, was privileged to add his own small mark to this monument, this testament to the power of God and the ambition of the Emperor Justinian. He quickened his pace, his heart filled with a quiet, joyful purpose. He entered the church grounds through a large bronze gate, leaving the noise of the mese behind. Here, the air was calmer, the sounds more muted. He joined a slow-moving stream of other workers, masons, carpenters, painters, and fellow mosaicists, all making their way to the various entrances of the great church. They were an army of artisans, united in this single, monumental task. Leo entered not through the grand imperial door, but through a smaller, humbler entrance on the side, reserved for the craftsmen. The moment he stepped inside, the world changed completely. The temperature dropped, the air becoming cool and still. The sounds from outside vanished, replaced by a vast, echoing silence that was not empty, but full of presence. His footsteps and those of the men around him seemed to shrink, to be swallowed by the immense space. His gaze was immediately drawn upward, as it always was. The light was everything. It poured in through the 40 windows that pierced the base of the dome, a ring of pure, celestial brilliance. It was not the direct, harsh light of the outside world, but a light that had been filtered, softened, and made holy. It streamed down in great, visible shafts, illuminating the swirling motes of dust and incense smoke, making them dance like tiny, golden angels. The light did not just illuminate the space, it filled it, became a tangible substance, an architectural element as real and as vital as the marble pillars and the soaring arches. The lower parts of the church were a controlled chaos of scaffolding, ropes, and piles of materials. The great marble columns, with their intricate lace-like capitals, rose like a forest of stone. The floors were a kaleidoscope of polished, colored marble, laid in vast, intricate patterns that seemed to flow like water. But Leo's destination was far above. He made his way to the series of wooden ramps and stairs that clung to the inside of one of the great piers. The ascent was long and arduous, a journey in itself. With each step, the vast floor of the church receded below him. The people moving about on it shrank to the size of ants. The great bronze chandeliers, which looked so massive from the ground, became delicate ornaments hanging in the void. As he climbed, the quality of the light changed. It grew brighter, purer. He rose through the galleries, past the spaces reserved for the empress and her court, and continued his climb into the upper reaches of the structure, a world of wood, rope, and dizzying heights that few would ever see. The sounds changed too. The echoing emptiness of the floor was replaced by the creak of the wooden scaffolding, the soft murmur of other workers, and the gentle whisper of the wind finding its way through the high windows. Finally, he reached his platform. It was a small, sturdy wooden stage, lashed securely to the scaffolding, nestled high up in one of the pendentives. From here, he was almost level with the base of the dome. He was in the realm of the angels. He could reach out and almost touch the streams of pure light pouring through the windows. The view was breathtaking. He could see the entire nave spread out beneath him like a map. Far below, the morning liturgy was beginning. He could see the tiny figures of the priests in their glittering vestments, and he could just faintly hear the sound of their chanting, a low, melodic hum that drifted up to him like a prayer. He was not alone. A few other mosaicists were working on nearby sections, each on their own small platform. They exchanged quiet nods of greeting. There was no need for words. They were brothers in a silent, sacred craft, each lost in his own world of color and form. Leo unslung his satchel and laid out his tools and his pouches of tesserae. The plasterers had already been here, laying a fresh, smooth patch of wet plaster, the ****, over the section of the seraphim's wing he was to work on today. It was just enough for a single day's work. The plaster had to be wet for the tesserae to set properly, a constant race against time, a discipline that forced a steady, focused rhythm. He took a moment to study the master drawing, a detailed sketch on parchment that was pinned to the wall beside him. It showed the precise flow of the feathers, the subtle shifts in color that would create the illusion of light and shadow. Then he looked at the wall itself. The artist before him had already sketched the design onto the plaster with a reddish-brown pigment called synopia. His task was to bring that outline to life. He began, as always, with the background, the field of gold. He took his trowel and spread a fine, final layer of setting plaster over a small area, smoothing it until it was perfectly even. Then he opened the pouch of golden tesserae. He poured a small handful onto a wooden board beside him. They glittered in the intense light, a pool of captured sunshine. He picked up a single tessera. He held it in his fingers, feeling its weight, its sharp edges. He looked at the wall, then at the tessera. With a small, precise movement, he pressed it into the wet plaster. It made a soft, satisfying sound, a gentle squish as it found its home. The plaster oozed up slightly around its edges, gripping it tight. This was the secret of the Byzantine shimmer, the magic that made the mosaics of Hagia Sophia seem to breathe. The tesserae were not set flat. Each one was placed at a slightly different angle, a fractional tilt, almost imperceptible to the eye. Leo's master, a wise old man named Paulus, had taught him this. "We do not fight the light, Leo," he had said, his voice a low rumble. "We do not simply reflect it, we catch it, we hold it, we make it dance. Each piece must be a tiny mirror, set to catch the light from a different place, from a window, from a candle, from the eye of God himself." And so Leo worked. One by one, he set the golden tesserae. He did not rush. His movements were fluid, economical, born of thousands of hours of practice. Pick up a tessera, turn it in his fingers. Observe the light. Press it into the plaster. A slight tilt to the left. The next one, a slight tilt to the right. Another, angled slightly downwards. It was a slow, painstaking process, a meditation in motion. The world outside his small platform ceased to exist. There was only the wet plaster, the growing field of gold, and the river of light pouring in from the windows. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the light within the dome shifted. The beams that streamed through the windows moved slowly across the vast interior, like the hands of a great celestial clock. Leo worked in harmony with this movement, adjusting the angles of his tesserae to catch the changing light. The patch of gold he was creating was not a flat, static surface. It was alive. As he moved his head, it seemed to flicker and shimmer, to ripple like water. It was a piece of heaven, and he was its humble scribe. After a few hours, the background for the day's section was complete. He paused, stretching his back, which was already beginning to ache from leaning forward. He took a sip of water from a flask and looked at his work. It was good. The gold was vibrant, dynamic. Now for the feathers. He opened the pouches of blues and whites. This was a different kind of work, requiring a different kind of thought. The gold was about capturing light. The feathers were about form, texture, and flow. He had to create the illusion of softness and strength, of a wing that could carry an angel through the heavens. He began with the darker shades of blue, defining the shadow beneath a row of feathers. He chose each piece with care, sometimes having to trim a piece with his asterix, Martellina asterix, and Hardy. He would place a larger tessera on the Hardy's sharp edge and give it a single sharp tap with the hammer. The glass would split with a satisfying click, leaving a clean, sharp edge. It was a skill that took years to master, to know exactly where and how hard to strike to get the perfect shape. He laid down a line of deep indigo, the pieces nestled tightly together. Then, next to it, a line of a slightly lighter cobalt. Then, a brighter azure. His fingers moved with a deftness and certainty that was almost unconscious. He was no longer thinking about the individual pieces of glass. He was thinking about the feather, about the way it would catch the air, the way it would lie against the one next to it. He was painting with stone. He moved on to the main body of the feathers, using the brilliant white marble. These he set in long flowing lines, following the curve of the wing as laid out in the master drawing. He interspersed the white with pieces of pale gray and the softest, almost translucent blue to give the feathers depth and a pearlescent sheen. Each piece was set with the same care as the gold, tilted just so, to create a subtle play of light and shadow across the surface of the wing. Time dissolved. The rhythmic click-tap of his hammer, the soft squish of tesserae being set into plaster, the distant, angelic chanting from the floor below, these were the only markers of its passage. He was lost in the work, his mind empty of all but the colors, the shapes, the light. This was his prayer, his connection to the eternal. In this high, silent place, surrounded by light, he felt closer to God than anywhere else on earth. He was a tiny gear in a vast, divine machine, and the rightness of his place in it filled him with a profound and quiet joy. At midday, a bell tolled somewhere in the church complex, signaling the time for the midday meal. The sound pulled Leo gently from his state of deep concentration. He blinked, as if waking from a dream. He looked at the section of wing he had created. It was beautiful. The feathers seemed to ripple with an inner life, the colors shifting and blending with an almost impossible subtlety. He felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. He carefully covered the remaining wet plaster with a damp cloth to keep it from drying out too quickly. He washed his hands in a bucket of water, the cool liquid, a soothing balm on his plaster-dusted skin. He then took out the bread he had wrapped that morning and a small, hard piece of goat's cheese. He ate his simple meal sitting on the edge of his platform, his legs dangling in the immense void. The church was quieter now, the morning liturgy finished. A few visitors wandered the floor far below, their heads tilted back in wonder. From his perch, Leo had a god's-eye view. He watched the light continue its slow, majestic journey across the marble floors and pillars. He saw how it caught the polished edges of the capitals, making them sparkle. He saw how it pooled in the great purple discs of porphyry set into the floor. He saw how it illuminated the mosaics that were already completed on the opposite walls, making the figures of saints and emperors glow with an otherworldly fire. He felt an overwhelming sense of connection to it all. He was part of a chain of creation that stretched back to the architects, to the masons who had laid the bricks, to the quarrymen who had cut the marble, and forward to the generations of worshippers who would stand on the floor below and gaze up in awe at the heaven he was helping to create. His name would never be known. He was an anonymous hand, one of many. But his work would endure. His small, patient efforts would become a part of this great, eternal hymn of praise. And that was enough. After his meal, he returned to his work. The afternoon brought a new quality of light, warmer, more golden. It slanted in from the western windows now, casting long shadows and setting the eastern walls ablaze. He worked on, his focus as intense as it had been in the morning. He moved from the feathers to the small, intricate curls of down at the base of the wing, using tiny, almost crumb-like pieces of white and gray stone. It was delicate, demanding work, requiring the utmost concentration. He worked until the light began to fail. The brilliant, direct sunlight softened, turning a warm, honey gold. The shadows in the great church grew long and deep. The air became cooler, heavier. Another bell tolled, signaling the end of the workday. Leo set his last tessera for the day. He stood back, his muscles aching, his eyes tired, and surveyed his work. A new section of the seraphim's wing was now complete, a vibrant, shimmering patch of color and light against the endless gold. It seemed to have been born of the light itself, a thing of pure beauty. He felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and exhilaration that came at the end of a good day's work. Slowly, methodically, he cleaned his tools, wiping the plaster from his trowels and hammer. He gathered the remaining tesserae, placing each color back into its proper pouch. He left his platform clean and orderly, ready for the next day. The work was never finished, it was only paused, a continuous river of creation. The descent from the scaffolding was a journey back to earth. As he climbed down the ramps and stairs, the world reasserted its proper scale. The great pillars grew to their true, colossal size. The floor rose up to meet him. By the time he reached the ground, he felt small again, a mere mortal in this house, built for God. He emerged from the church back into the late afternoon city. The air was warm and hazy, filled with the golden light of the setting sun. The frantic energy of the morning and midday had subsided, replaced by a more leisurely, end-of-day rhythm. The crowds on the Maze were thinner now, people making their way home or to the public baths. But Leo was not yet ready to go home. The intense, focused concentration of his work left him feeling hollowed out, in a way, and he needed to fill himself back up with the gentle, sensory pleasures of the city. He decided to walk through the markets. He wandered away from the grand avenues and into the labyrinth of smaller streets and covered bazaars that huddled in the shadow of the great palace. Here, the world was a rich tapestry of smells, sounds, and colors. He walked first through the spice market, a narrow, covered street, where the air was so thick with fragrance it was almost tangible. He breathed deeply, letting the exotic scents wash over him. The sweet, woody aroma of cinnamon bark piled high in great baskets. The sharp, medicinal smell of cloves. The earthy, pungent scent of cumin and turmeric. The delicate, floral perfume of saffron, that most precious of spices, displayed in small, gleaming threads in locked glass boxes. The air itself seemed to be a form of wealth, a treasure imported from the furthest corners of the empire and beyond. From there, he drifted into the silk bazaar. Here the senses were dazzled by sight and touch. Bolts of silk were stacked to the ceilings of the small shops, cascading down in waterfalls of color. There was the deep, regal purple of Tyre, a color reserved for the emperor himself, shimmering in the lamplight. There was the vibrant crimson of cochineal, the brilliant blue of indigo, the rich, sun-drenched yellow of weld. He reached out and let a length of emerald green silk slide through his fingers. It was impossibly smooth and cool, as light as air, yet strong. He imagined these fabrics made into the flowing robes of the saints and angels he created in his mosaics, and he smiled. He did not buy anything. He was not a shopper. He was an observer, a connoisseur of sensations. He listened to the gentle hum of commerce, the soft-spoken negotiations between merchants and customers. He watched a coppersmith in a small, open-fronted workshop, rhythmically tapping a sheet of metal with a small hammer. The gentle, bell-like tink-tink-tink, a soothing metallic heartbeat in the market's hum. He passed a bookseller's stall, and the dry, papery scent of parchment and the sharp tang of ink filled the air. He saw scrolls and codices filled with the wisdom of the ancients and the words of the church fathers, their pages covered in elegant, flowing script. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, dramatic shadows down the narrow streets, Leo felt his spirit settle. The quiet observation of the world's simple, beautiful things had replenished him. He bought a piece of fruit, a ripe, blushing peach, from a vendor, the sweet, fuzzy skin warm from the last of the day's sun. He made his way out of the maze of markets and walked towards the water. He found a quiet spot on the low sea wall that overlooked the Golden Horn, the great natural harbor that was the lifeblood of the city. He sat on the warm stone and watched the end of the day. The scene before him was one of profound and gentle beauty. The sun, a great, molten orb of orange, was sinking behind the hills on the European side, setting the sky on fire. The clouds were painted in impossible shades of rose, violet, and gold. The surface of the Golden Horn was a mirror of liquid fire, reflecting the sky's glorious farewell. Dozens of ships, from small fishing skiffs to large, broad-beamed merchant dromons, lay at anchor, their masts and rigging a delicate black lacework against the vibrant sky. The rhythmic chant of sailors weighing anchor, the lonely cry of a gull circling overhead, the gentle, lapping sound of water against the stone wall, it was the city's evening song. Leo ate his peach. The juice was warm and sweet, and it dribbled down his chin. He ate it slowly, savoring the taste of summer, a perfect, simple pleasure. He sat for a long time, watching as the fiery colors in the sky softened and faded into a deep, velvety purple. The first stars began to appear. Faint diamonds pricked into the darkening fabric of the sky. Across the water, on the Genoese side, lamps and torches were being lit, their reflections trembling on the dark water. He thought about his day, about his small life in this vast, magnificent city. He thought about the angel's wing, waiting for him in the darkness of the great church. He knew that the mosaic would outlast him by centuries, perhaps even a millennium. It would continue to shimmer and glow long after his own hands had turned to dust. There was no sadness in this thought, only a deep and abiding peace. He was a link in a great chain, a single tessera in a vast, divine mosaic. His purpose was to play his small part, to add his tiny piece of beauty to the world, and to do it with all the skill and love and humility he possessed. The beauty of the sunset, the taste of the peach, the majesty of the great church, the shimmering life of his mosaics. They were all, he felt, different facets of the same divine light. His work was not to create that light, but simply to arrange the pieces of the world in such a way that the light could shine through them more clearly. When the sky was dark and filled with a thick blanket of stars, Leo finally stood up. He felt a deep, peaceful weariness in his bones. It was the good weariness of a day well spent, of a purpose fulfilled. He made his way back through the now quiet, lamplit streets. The sounds were soft again, as they had been in the morning. The distant barking of a dog, the murmur of a family eating their evening meal behind a shuttered window, the soft shuffle of his own sandals on the stone. He reached his small, whitewashed room. He pushed open the door and was greeted by the familiar, comforting silence of his own small space. He lit a single oil lamp, and its small, gentle flame pushed back the darkness, casting a warm, flickering glow on his tools and his trays of colored glass. The tesserae seemed to sleep now, their vibrant colors muted, waiting for the return of the sun. He washed the dust of the day from his face and hands. He ate the last of his bread from the morning. He sat for a moment on the edge of his bed, the silence of the room wrapping around him like a soft blanket. He said a simple prayer of thanks, for the strength in his hands, for the light in his eyes, for the beauty of the world, for another day spent in the service of that beauty. Then he blew out the lamp, plunging the room into a soft, deep darkness. He lay down on his mattress and pulled the linen sheet up to his chin. Through his open window he could hear the faint, distant sound of water lapping against the shore, a gentle, eternal rhythm. It was the last sound he heard as he closed his eyes and let himself drift into a deep, dreamless, and well-earned sleep, his mind at peace, ready for the dawn, when he would wake and once again climb into the sky to make the angels fly.